Welcome to ACR On Air, the official podcast of the American College of Rheumatology, where we have engaging conversations with leading rheumatology professionals on topics such as the latest research on rheumatic diseases, solutions for addressing practice management issues, legislative policies impacting patient care, and more. Here's your host.
Welcome back to another episode of ACR On Air, the official podcast of the American College of Rheumatology. I am your host, Dr. John Hausman. Show notes for this episode can be found at acronair.org. You can find our previous episodes on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on your favorite podcast app. It's 2023 and it's finally here. The first Humira biosimilar, Amgevita, launched today. This occurred 2 decades after Humira came to market and 7 years after Amgevita was first approved by the FDA. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Marcus Snow, Chair of the Committee on Rheumatologic Care, and Amanda Guigriff, the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the ACR, to share some insights about the biosimilar debate. We'll discuss what a biosimilar is, why they're causing such a fuss these days, and why they've taken so long to come to market. We review the evidence behind the safety and efficacy of these drugs, the data on switching from a bio-originator to a biosimilar, and how the approval of these drugs may ultimately lower healthcare costs and improve access to these medications. Dr. Marcus Snow is an assistant professor at the University of Nebraska Division of Rheumatology. As chair of the Committee on Rheumatologic Care, he's really taken a leadership role in shaping ACR policy regarding the practice of rheumatology, especially as it comes to biosimilars. Amanda Guigriff is the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the ACR. She develops strategies related to federal regulations that affect access to rheumatologic care, including interchangeability guidance for biosimilars and monitoring payer policies regarding the prescription biosimilars. She earned her Master's of Science in Health Sciences focused on regulatory affairs, and she also holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science with a focus in public policy from the George Washington University. Amanda and Marcus, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much.
So we've been hearing a lot about biosimilars over the last 5 years or so, but I got to tell you, this is the first time that I see on the front page of the New York Times an article about biosimilars. Why is it such a hot topic these days?
You know, I think that today is International Biosimilar Day, or maybe not international, but it's like American Biosimilar Day today.
No kidding. Why is that?
Well, you know, I think that every radio station, if you listen to the morning news, it's always like Hot Dog Day or something. I think that today is truly Biosimilar Day here in the United States, and that's because this is the day today when we're recording this session is the day, January 31st, when the first subcutaneous biosimilar TNF is available in the United States.
And what is that subcutaneous biosimilar?
So it's Amgevita, but it's a biosimilar for Humira. So this is the first time that we will have biosimilars available at our pharmacies, and they'll be mailed out to patients. They'll be picked up by patients. Because as you know, we've had some biosimilars available in intravenous form, but this year there are going to be multiple Humira biosimilars available. And we think that this is going to change a lot of aspects of prescriptions of TNFs here in the U.S.
That is so cool. And certainly Humira is, sort of a blockbuster drug, one of the top-selling drugs, in the world. So it's quite remarkable that only today will we get the first biosimilar. So let's take a step back a little bit. And Marcus, can you explain a little bit about what is a biosimilar and, what is required of the product to classify as a biosimilar?
Yeah, so I think that the terminology is tough. And this is something that I think that to really understand why we're calling these biosimilars and not generics, which I think is a topic we could discuss further during this conversation. But the reason this is happening is that if you have to look at biologic medications are about 1,000 times larger than our small molecules. So as an example, naproxen is about 230 daltons, whereas infliximab is about 150,000 daltons. And so when you manufacture these proteins, they are so large that there's no way you can make a 100% exact copy because of all the intricacies and the complexity of protein binding and post translational modification, etc. So these molecules are just ginormous.
Aha. So it seems like, I guess it's a poor man's equivalent of a generic drug. So these are drugs that are supposed to be similar, or as close to similar as possible as their bio-originator, but aren't quite 100% the same. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. The analogy I've been using with patients when I've been discussing this is if you took blueprints for the Empire State Building, and you got a piece of land and you built the Empire State Building. And then once you're done, you go across the street and you use those same blueprints, the same construction workers, everything's the same. And you build the Empire State Building again, you're going to have some small differences. The code, the white may be slightly different in one room versus another. The doorknobs may be slightly different, but the entirety of the structure is going to be functionally the same, and it's going to look identical, but if you could find some very small changes in the structure.
I got it. And then I guess, in theory, and we'll talk about this more, the fact that they're so similar means that their efficacy and safety is also similar to the drug that it's supposed to mimic or represent.
Yeah, so for these drugs to hit the market, they have had to undergo rigorous testing with the reference product, and when they do that, they have to prove that in many ways in their structural, they can analyze their structural content, their glycan profile, their purity, how well they work in enzymatic tests, and so they go through all this very rigorous testing to ensure that they are identical in how they function.
So, Marcus, in addition to sort of proving that the molecules are similar, do these biosimilars also undergo testing to ensure that patients with rheumatoid arthritis get better, or patients with uveitis get better in a similar way that they do with Humira?
Yeah, they do. When the testing came about for biosimilars and the whole pathway was established, I think there was a lot of debate on how much patient testing would be needed. And so the argument was that if you can prove that when you do biochemical testing, these drugs are the same product, they have the same mechanism of action on when they do testing side by sides, they're identical. Do you really need to send them through study after study after study in inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, etc.? The numbers have not been identical to what you would see for the approval of Humira, but what you see studies that do have various disease states. So rheumatoid arthritis was included in all these studies, and you saw ankylosing spondylitis and some, and so you saw a smattering across the way, but the extrapolation was a debatable topic.
Interesting. And Amanda, before we started the show, you mentioned that this is your favorite topic to discuss. Why are you so excited about biosimilars?
It is. I've actually been part of these biosimilar conversations since 2008 when the, initial conversations about what a pathway should look like and what the exclusivity looks like and what does the pathway look like. And eventually this pathway was included in the Affordable Care Act, which was passed in 2010. So this has truly been watching this evolution. And it's really exciting to be here today to see this adalimumab biosimilar hit the market, when I remember in 2008 sitting here and really looking at what does this all look like, and to see it come to fruition. It's very exciting.
And Amanda, the big push, what is the big push for, pushing for biosimilars? What do you think, patients, providers, and the healthcare system could get as a result of biosimilars?
I think theoretically, and the hope is that it provides for affordable access to these life changing and life altering treatments. We all know that Humira is an expensive medication. It's expensive for a reason. As Dr. Snow mentioned, it is a large molecule. The manufacturing process is incredibly intricate. So they are expensive medications. And so to have a biosimilar, something that will have the same effectiveness and allow for the patients to continue to live their lives, but do so, we hope, in a more cost-effective way, is really exciting. And my hope is that it allows for an increased access to these medications.
Got it. So in the same way that, often generic drugs allow for people to access the same medication at lower prices, the hope is that biosimilars will allow people to access, adalimumab, but at a lower cost.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
Great. And certainly there's concerns by physicians and by patients as well that, hey, I've been on Humira for 5 years. It's working great. I don't want to switch, right? What if the new medication is not as effective? Or what if I have side effects from this new adalimumab biosimilar? Marcus, has there been testing done about, switching from the bio-originator to the biosimilar and the safety and efficacy of that?
Yeah, absolutely, there has, and I think that this is what you described as the crux that all rheumatologists fear, and all patients maybe fear, but patients are concerned about. Certainly, as you know, if you're on a biologic, you've failed something. Usually, there are obviously exceptions, but you've usually failed something, and you have found control difficult. And so if you reach that point where you're doing well and then someone walks up to you and says, "Yeah, we're going to switch you to a cheaper medication," that can certainly, make you worried about how your disease control is going to be. And so we've seen this in studies, and the studies that have been done have shown very low overall failure rate. And a lot of the failure rate that was seen is due to some subjective measures. And certainly, a patient coming in and saying, "I feel worse," means something, but when you're looking at it from a study standpoint, we're not seeing huge amounts of swollen joints in our RA patients, et cetera, but they have seen some subjective complaints. But most of those have been equal between the originator and the biosimilar product.
It's interesting. So I guess part of the nocebo effect, right? That if you think ahead of time that the new medication, that the biosimilar is not going to be as good or as effective as the original, or that it's going to have more side effects, you may actually experience less efficacy and more side effects just because that's what you expect to happen.
Yeah, I think that the best example of that, the two studies I think that kind of compare and contrast that was the Switch trial, which was blinded, and they had an equal dropout rate in the biosimilar and the biooriginator arm. And the BioSwitch was open label from the Netherlands, and that had about a 24% quote unquote failure rate of the biosimilar and a 5% failure rate of the biooriginator. And I think that it all depends on the context, and it depends on the education. I think explaining to patients and making sure that if you do make a change, the patient's comfortable with it and understands the background behind it. I think that certainly many people argue that will make a big difference.
Yeah. And Amanda, how do you expect this to play a role in how insurance companies will approve drugs? Let's say I have a new patient with rheumatoid arthritis. I want to start them on Humira. Do you think insurance companies are going to say, like, well, we don't approve Humira, but we approve the biosimilar Amgevita. Why don't you start with that medicine? Or do you think that they're even going to take people on Humira and ask them to switch to the biosimilars? How do you think that's going to play out?
I think that's the $1 million question. As of right now, all of the big pharmacy benefit managers, which work, with the insurance companies, they've all said that they're going to put these adalimumab biosimilars at parity with Humira, which means they're about the same. So they're not really saying you have to do this versus that. That's now, that's today, January 31st, 2023. What does this look like January 31st, 2024? I don't know. We can sort of extrapolate what we've seen in the past with insurance companies and how they've done that with other medications. It would not surprise me. I do think that is where we're probably going to end up going. As of this moment, everything's at parity. So they haven't sort of said you have to do biosimilar on a lower tier before you get to Humira on a higher tier. They haven't done that yet. And I think that's the big word, is yet. We will see once we start seeing more biosimilars enter the market, and once the insurance companies start seeing what those claims and the utilization, we may start seeing things along those lines coming down the pipe.
Got it. So the fact that they're at parity, does that mean that physicians are allowed to prescribe either brand name Humira or the biosimilar Amgevita equally, and they can both get covered just as well?
As of right now, yes, that is today. That is today.
I can imagine, in the future that, whenever you have like a new year and new partnerships, patients might be asked to switch from brand name Humira to the first biosimilar. And then maybe the next year, the insurance company found a better deal with a different biosimilar. And then the patient gets switched from a biosimilar to a different biosimilar. Marcus, is there a theoretical risk that because the molecules aren't exactly the same, that they might are more likely to have like an immune reaction or more likely to have side effects if they cycle between these biosimilars?
Yeah, I think that that's been a big concern of mine, and I think of a lot of folks is how is this going to play out from year to year to year? So what biosimilar are you on each year, and does that make the drug lose efficacy? And I think that a couple things that have eased my mind a little bit recently would be, the first is that you see some of the interchangeability studies that are done where you see multiple switches between two products. So originator to biosimilar, back to the originator, back to the biosimilar, back to the originator. You see multiple switches there. We haven't seen a lot of increased drug antibodies. But I think if there's any benefit of the US being last to the biosimilar party, it's that we do have some data of multiple biosimilars of the same drug and the drug antibodies, or lack thereof, that have been shown in some of those studies. So over the past few years, there have been a smattering of studies that have shown that alternating between multiple products, you don't see the increased drug antibodies. I think that, like anything in medicine, that continued study is going to be important, but at least the initial reports are reassuring in that regard.
Got it. So, Marcus, talk a little bit more about sort of how biosimilars are being played out in other countries and why it's taken so long to have the first Humira biosimilar today. I mean, what, 20 years after the drug first went to market?
Yeah, it's kind of insane. I actually did the math, and Amgevita was approved in September of 2016 in the U.S., and so that's 2,321 days since approval to launch, which is astounding to me. And I think Amanda can talk on the regulatory steps, but I think a lot of this had to do with patent infringement, lawsuits about patent infringement, and patent law is extraordinarily complex, and I'll never claim to be an expert in it, nor do I want to be. But it's taken a long time here in the US to clear the way for biosimilars to be available to patients across the US. Now, regarding your question on other countries with health systems that are federalized are able to negotiate, and so they have their biosimilar of choice, and it's a competitive negotiation. And so we've seen significant decrease in price and the cost of biologic medications across the board due to biosimilar availability in multiple European countries.
Got it. Okay. So this is something that's already happening in Europe. It's just beginning to happen here in the US. Amanda, can you provide a little bit more insight? I mean, Marcus said that in 2016, Amgevita was approved and it's now 2023 and the drug is just hitting the market now. What took it so long?
So this is the not glamorous part of that pharmaceutical company. Obviously, the reference product manufacturer, they saw that they were going to lose a huge market share of Humira. And so they did what's called patent thicketing. And basically, they changed some of the manufacturing process, some of the administration process of Humira, and were able to have 132 different patents on these changes. And these patents are actually not due to expire until 2034. So they were able to really use that patent system and create more of a longevity for their product. They also went into agreement with some of the biosimilar manufacturers, and this is what's called sort of pay for delay or agreed to delay. And they came up with an agreement with some of these manufacturers to have them not put their product on the market until this date, until 2023. So we are seeing years of going through the patent process and going through sort of this, I don't want to say gamesmanship, but gamesmanship between these pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's pretty extreme what they have gone to pay companies to delay pushing out their biosimilars because, certainly that's going to cost, the pharmaceutical company that makes Humira a whole bunch of money. But that came at the expense of taxpayers, of people, of the government, of health insurance companies. That seems a little bit unfair.
Unfortunately, it's not a new practice, and it's definitely not just for this. We've seen this a lot. Congress, I know, has definitely talked about what's called evergreening and pay for delay, these sort of tactics. They really are looking at this in terms of drug pricing and what that looks like. So, unfortunately, it's not new, but it definitely made a big impact on the release of the biosimilar.
Wow. Amanda, can you talk a little bit more about what the ACR is doing on behalf of patients and rheumatologists, in this arena? Like, what's the ACR's take on biosimilars in general?
Sure. And Marcus is actually the chair of our committee that really just updated our position statement. So I'll let him take that. But I will say that from the ACR point of view, we've obviously been part of these conversations from the very beginning, recognizing the huge impact that biosimilars will have on our patients. And so we've been part of those conversations with the FDA. We will be part of these conversations now that they are sort of finally getting their moment to shine. These biosimilars are getting their moment to shine. We'll start talking to the insurance companies and start looking and monitoring where they are in the pharmacy benefit manager formularies. We have a wonderful relationship with a number of patient groups, and we've been really trying to work with them to help them explain to their membership and their patients what this means, what the possibilities of what this means for their overall bottom line, and what possible questions they may have. There are still questions that we have to answer. And so ACR is working with our patient colleagues on that. And we've actually just updated our position statement, and I will let Marcus talk about that.
Thanks, Amanda. Before I go into that, I just want to emphasize the the amazing staff that we have at the ACR. And I think that until I was involved as an ACR volunteer, I never realized that the depth of involvement that we have. And so, as Amanda mentioned, we've been at this from the beginning on the legislative, on the regulatory side, and all the way to the point where we are today. So I think that a big kudos to all the work that they've done as to help us out as rheumatologists has been amazing and very well appreciated. So regarding the biosimilar position statement, I've been involved as a volunteer with the ACR for basically the better part of 7 years, and I've spent most of that time on the Committee on Rheumatologic Care. So back in 2016, we started discussing biosimilars, and I've been able to see how the rheumatologists feel differently in this regard. And as time has passed, we've seen a significant acceptance of biosimilars through this, and I think that's referenced by our current position statement. And currently, most rheumatologists, when we had a vote on the Committee on Rheumatologic Care on how we felt on biosimilars, there was no one in the room who was concerned about a biosimilar as a new start for a patient, and so that's front and center on our. And this was approved by the board of directors subsequently.
So just saying that for a patient with new onset rheumatoid arthritis who needs to start a TNF inhibitor, starting biosimilar Amgevita versus Humira really shouldn't make much of a difference.
Correct.
Got it.
It was felt that the science is there, and that there were no qualms of anyone in the room with starting a biosimilar in that regard.
Okay.
And so the bigger question, the bigger discussion point was, if you have a patient who's stable on a bio-originator product, where do we stand on switching? And I think that there's significant concern about switching stable patients, and I think that we believe that the decision to switch should be between the rheumatologist and the patient. That really should be a decision made together and not based on economics of a third party. And so that's where the ACR stands at this moment. I certainly think that if you look at that stance, I think it's more a function of the physician patient relationship more than it is truly against biosimilars. I think that overall we continue to feel that we spend a lot of time in training. We're in the exam room with a patient. We know them. We know their everything about their background, and we make that decision. We don't take that decision lightly. And so that's where I think that stance originates from. But I think with biosimilars, I think that the decision to switch should be one that's made between the physician and the patient.
Got it. That's very sensible. I like that a lot. I think all the data say that, these biosimilars really are just as efficacious, just as safe as the original drug. In patients that are doing well, I share your concerns. Like, if they're doing so well on the original medication, why are we going to switch them over? Even if it's just that their perception of the switch, that they have a negative perception on the switch, and that might actually play out with real, worsening clinical outcomes, just because they didn't feel as safe on these newer drugs as on the original. But I imagine as time goes on, more and more people get started on these biosimilars. Maybe it'll be less of an issue.
I agree with you. I think with time, as we are using these medications, we'll get a little more comfort, and I think that you'll see that things will change a little bit as far as where the average rheumatologist stands in that regard. But it's amazing to have options, I think, and moving forward, hopefully we'll see some continued bending of the cost curve that will allow for more access to these medications.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So is Amgevita cheaper than Humira?
Well, Amanda sent me an email right before this all started, actually, because I think it was just announced this morning where they were coming, or at least it was publicly announced. So, Amanda, I'll let you take that.
Sure. So Amgevita is actually coming in at two prices. One is 55% less than the Humira price, and the other is 5% less. And the question is everyone will sit there and say, okay, well, 55%, we'll obviously take that. But as we know, rebates and other things will be part of these equations. So we may get to the point where from the 5% list price may be the one that insurance want because of rebates and other things that we know go on behind the scenes. But yes, I mean, we're looking at 55% of a Humira cost. And as I think everyone knows, Humira is incredibly expensive. And so 55%, what we do see and what we've seen sort of as projections is it should change the cost for the overall spending. We're thinking maybe 25%. And that's not insignificant when you think about the high spend that Humira is for all of the patients.
After I asked you about the cost, I realized that, trying to get a sense of how much a drug costs is incredibly complex, right? Because there's cost, to the patient, there's cost to the insurance company, there's cost to the healthcare system. And as you said, because of rebates, those costs may vary widely between people and between insurance companies and whatnot. But at least it's, somewhat reassuring that, the expectations is that this may lower cost by 25%, which is, pretty good considering this is, multi-billion-dollar business in the United States.
It's interesting too that the number 55%. So if you take infliximab, which has had biosimilars since I believe 17, if you look at the ASP, so that the average price, the average sales price for Remicade and infliximab, I actually looked this up before the show. It's actually 58% of what it used to be. So it's basically, we've had a 58% reduction in price of infliximab since the initiation of biosimilars.
Oh, of brand name infliximab.
Either, both. They're all priced the same. So the ASP for Remicade, for Inflectra, for Efsola is all basically essentially the same. If you compare it to, if you have the high water mark as Remicade when it was the only medication on the market, and then you take it now with the biosimilars that are available, the price has dropped just shy of 60%.
Ah, that's incredible.
So you see that, which is really interesting. They came in at 55%. Is obviously, I don't think that's a coincidence. But if you look back historically, though, when infliximab, when there was only one biosimilar, there was very little price movement initially. And then once you had two biosimilars available, that you saw the movement in the ASP. So, and that's obviously IV, and there's more costs involved with giving an intravenous medication than there is, simple subcutaneous. But the 55%, when I saw that, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. So, the fact that biosimilars are available, it's going to push the price of the original drug lower. And it's interesting, in this article I mentioned about in the New York Times that came out about biosimilars, they mentioned that Humira's price has increased 30 times over the last 20 years, most recently by 8% this past month. So it's it's definitely great to hear that patients and the healthcare system may have some relief by maybe pushing that number, for the first time down instead of up.
It'll be interesting to see with how the PBM rebate process works. By no means am I an economist related to healthcare policy. I would hope that it drives it down, but I do, with the rebate system, there still is a driving push to provide bigger rebates and increase costs per year. So I don't know, Amanda, what do you think will happen in that regard?
I think you're right. I think we're still seeing, we have struggles with the PBM program and those rebates in everything else. I think that this is not going to be any different. The fact that there will be more options and that competitiveness, I think will hopefully help. But I don't think we're done with this idea of PBMs and rebates and list prices and sales prices. We're not done with that yet. So I think that this is just going to amplify some of those things that we're already talking about.
Great. So if listeners out there, whether it's patients or physicians or other practitioners, if they are sort of interested in and wanted to help, what can they do? How can they help with the ACR and push for lower prices and more accessibility of these drugs?
Get involved, just like Marcus. We at the ACR staff level, we rely on our physician and our provider leaders for everything. You are the ones in the rooms. The patients are the ones, obviously, that, we do everything. I do everything I do to make sure that the patient gets the right treatment at the right time. So we encourage everyone. The ACR has a very robust government affairs committee. We have a committee on rheumatologic care that Marcus chairs. So being involved in these two, especially these two committees, we talk about this all the time, and we're always trying to figure out what is the best way that we can advocate for the patients. So please get involved. And we always look forward to hearing different perspectives and different viewpoints.
So Marcus, is it true that Humira vintage, I don't know, 2005 is any different than Humira 2023?
Yeah, this is a really amazing concept that I had no knowledge of prior to doing a deep dive into biosimilars. So all biologics, first off, biologics are made by a living organism. And so small differences from factory to factory called batch to batch variability exist. And so that's something that has existed throughout the manufacturing process of biologics that is well known. Additionally, biologics through time, they change their manufacturing process subtly, and these have to be logged with the FDA. And so Remicade has had over 35 changes in its manufacturing process, whereas Humira has had over 20 changes in the manufacturing process since it originally hit the market. And so these changes are are they have to prove these changes have no physiologic change in their original structure, because it would essentially invalidate their original approval. But at the same time, these molecules are slightly different. This is so much different that actually, when a lot of these drugs were tested, when some of the infliximab drugs were biosimilars were being tested, they had to test themselves against US based Remicade and against European based Remicade to basically prove that they were biosimilar to both.
So you're saying that the Humira of today is a biosimilar of the Humira of 2005?
Yeah. It's kind of mind blowing a little bit when you think about it. And so when I was first coming to, trying to figure out how I felt on this, that stat alone just really opened my eyes. And the Remicade, when you start the medication, if you're on Remicade, and the Remicade of 2023 are different. Very, very, very subtly, but they're different.
That's fascinating. So basically, we've been using biosimilars for the last 20 years. We just haven't called it that.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And I think there was even a point where they compared. One of the studies that I looked at, actually, they did the testing with the three versions: the European, the American, and the biosimilar, and they actually compared them to each other. And you couldn't, if you lined them up and all the biochemical analysis, and you didn't know which compared to which, you couldn't tell that two of those comparisons were actually Remicade. They weren't the same. So one was European, one was American, based. So it's a phenomenal concept, and I think that one that speaks to the fact that we've been comfortable with biosimilars for years, but haven't really even realized it.
Interesting. So maybe it's much ado about nothing, huh?
Yeah, we'll see. But I think that certainly that helped me sort through this.
Great. So one last question for both of you. Best case scenario, 5 years from now, what's the field of biosimilars look like?
Oh, wow. Great. There's so many levels to that. So, I mean, I think in 5 years, and I don't have in front of me a list of what drugs will have biosimilars, but obviously the drugs that have been around longer are more likely to have biosimilars sooner. I truly think that we're going to end up where we almost look back at this consternation over biosimilars versus bio-originator and laugh a little bit. I think these medications are equals, and I think that we're not going to worry about them whether my patient gets Amgevita or Humira in the future. That's what I think we're going to be. And I think the whole cost aspect of things, I'd love to live in a world where biologics are easy to access because their price has trended down. But that's a big question mark in my mind.
Amanda, what do you think?
I mean, I agree. My hope is that with competition comes that lowering of cost, and I agree with Marcus. I do think that we will eventually look back on biosimilars kind of like we do with generics. It's part of the fabric of our healthcare system. I think, and I hope, and ACR is really working on sort of PBM reform in general. So my hope is that we have reformed the system will be on its way of reforming with regard to sort of how formularies are developed and the rebates, so that we really do get to see the cost savings and the downward trend in cost to the patients. That's my hope, and that's my very optimistic hope that we're able to finally see and realize those.
Great. And they live happily ever after.
Exactly.
This has been a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate you taking your time to speak with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Everything you ever wanted to know about biosimilars, but were afraid to ask. Thank you all for listening, downloading, subscribing to our show, and for rating us with 5 stars, or however many stars you think we deserve. You can find our show notes for this episode at acronair.org, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, stay healthy.